Okay, I didn't necessarily want to make this video because, we're supposedly supposed to be using kid gloves right now with Elizabeth Warren because she's just so fragile of a person, or maybe so narcissistic in some sense, that she's so deeply concerned about what random strangers post online about her, like snake emojis, or somehow supposedly this hateful symbol. And it just further reveals, really, honestly, like her character at this point. That so I'm referencing, if you're not familiar, a interview that Elizabeth Warren did a couple days ago with Rachel Maddow right after she dropped out, basically. And Rachel Maddow was asking Elizabeth Warren, do does does Bernie bear the responsibility for how his supporters act, and specifically how they act online? And she said that they do, and that Bernie bears responsibility for how these complete strangers, people that Bernie Sanders obviously has like no direct control over. And he said repeatedly that he encourages all of his supporters to be kind, polite, cordial, not to say anything offensive, just, act in a totally reasonable fashion. In person, online, wherever. Bernie Sanders is the most kind of polite, easygoing, just good person that I feel like has run for president in a long time. He's just a genuine good human being, from everything I've heard, for how his policies disproportionately positively impact the working people of the United States, how his policies reflect a lens of economic and increasingly racial justice. And so for Elizabeth Warren to try to throw shade at Bernie Sanders, saying he bears responsibility for what his supporters post online, is just, it makes no sense. What is she? I mean, I really appreciate Michael Brooks' take on this particular issue. His point was basically that Elizabeth Warren going on Rachel Maddow, and instead of, maybe talking about defeating Donald Trump, or how Trump has kids in cages, or why we need Medicare for all because we have 70 plus thousand people dying each year due to lack of health care, how we have 500 plus thousand going bankrupt, how we desperately need a Green New Deal so our generation and future generations have a inhabitable planet to live on, how we need to end our empire, that we have over 700 military bases all throughout the world, how over half of our discretionary spending goes to that, how we need to tax and regulate Wall Street, one of the huge issues that she ran on. Instead of focusing on any of these very important issues, she instead talks about online behavior of Bernie Sanders supporters and how he bears responsibility. And then Elizabeth Warren is also asked, she said it's a particular problem with Bernie Sanders supporter, and that is just insane on its head. I have seen some unbelievably just hateful and rancid and just completely disgusting political takes online from people who support Joe Biden, or people who like the K-Hive people, Pete Buttigieg people, Trump people, obviously, and yes, even some Bernie people sometimes probably go a little bit overboard and maybe post some things that are insensitive or inflammatory in some way. But guess what? That's free speech, and we can't be the thought and word police. We're not going to turn this into George Orwell's 1984, this just complete dystopian world where we have to really control, where we don't have free speech. Like how can Bernie Sanders control what his supporters say or do online? And again, whenever he's asked or pressed on this issue, he reverts back to his supporters needing to be cordial, be polite, be kind online, and to act in this very reasonable and upright fashion. So it's just so ridiculous for Elizabeth Warren to try to say that Bernie Sanders supporters are somehow especially grotesque or just hateful or outrageous online, when it's just not the case. I think every political candidate supporter will have, especially when you get to literally millions of people, will have somebody or some peoples that say some messed up things online. But guess what? That's free speech, and yes, we should disavow that stuff when it happens. We obviously shouldn't be condoning any type of hatefulness or bigotry or xenophobia or sexism or homophobia or ageism or any of these types of things. It's just like, it's free speech, and Bernie can't, he doesn't control the keyboards of the millions and the cell phones of the millions of people's and emails that supports him. Okay, that's just not the case. And then she brought up, to my knowledge, I hadn't heard about this before, but I don't know, something about some people that people who work for the Working Families Party getting doxxed, to women of color. She said getting doxxed because they endorsed, or their organization at least endorsed, Elizabeth Warren over Bernie Sanders. But a little bit of a backstory on that. It seems a little bit shady, like they didn't actually get the membership of the Working Family Parties, like the members of that organization didn't actually get to vote for who the organization as a whole should endorse. I believe it was more of like the board of directors or the executives, the kind of corporate managerial elite of the Working Families Party made this decision, when in 2016 I believe they overwhelmingly supported Bernie Sanders over Hillary Clinton. I could be wrong about that, but I believe that's kind of a little bit of the backstory there. Obviously, we shouldn't be doxing people who work for the Working Families Party. I'm definitely okay with that happening to neo-Nazis and white supremacists as a form of activism to get those people to not act in very just hateful and disgusting ways, but definitely not people who work for the Working Families Party. For sure, that should be definitely condemned when it happens. But obviously Bernie Sanders isn't responsible for the people doing that. He would never encourage that. He's the most non-violent, rational, and empathetic candidate running for president, in my opinion, and his policy platform is a direct representation of his moral outlook. He has the most peaceful foreign policy, foreign policy, has the most racially and economically just set of economic policies, with things like Medicare for all, canceling student loan debt, legalizing marijuana, ending the war on drugs, abolishing ICE, taxing Wall Street, a Green New Deal, a living wage, canceling student loan debt, canceling medical debt, all of these things. So to say that he would somehow condone people getting doxxed that work for the Working Family Party's organization is just completely ridiculous. Elizabeth Warren is just so off base with her take, and again, it just really speaks to her narcissism that at this really incredibly crucial and important time in American politics, this really bifurcation point, if you want to go there, it can go two directions. And one of those directions is obviously 4 more years of Donald Trump, which again would be this even more hugely disastrous for the environment, for racial and economic justice. He would continue to pack the courts with, these right-wing wacko conservative justices that, won't uphold, Roe v. Wade, and will just side with corporations and authoritarianism and deregulation and destruction of the environment, all of these things, and continuing to further exacerbate wealth inequality, continuing the further just dehumanization and just completely immoral treatment of migrants coming to this country, the continued empire. He's not going to fight for Medicare for all. He's not going to fight for a Green New Deal. All of these things. So the stakes are very high. And then you have Elizabeth Warren dropping out, still a big endorsement. If she were to support Bernie Sanders, I think it would be a boost to him. And so instead of using that platform for any number of really positive, substantive issues, she again keeps harping back to the whole, ridiculous Bernie bro narrative, when again Bernie Sanders has the most diverse working class coalition of any candidate. And it, when you label his movement as the Bernie Bros or the Bernie Bro supporters, it's a complete erasure of that hugely racially, ethnically, economically diverse, set of supporters that support Bernie Sanders. So again, this isn't me throwing any type of shade or condescension at this point towards Elizabeth Warren supporters. I deeply and highly encourage you to support Bernie Sanders at this point. The Not Me Us movement is a really beautiful and magical movement that really wants to make sure the U.S. society and government is functioning and working in such a way that it's actually benefiting the working people of this country and not the billionaire owner class, as Bernie Sanders likes to point out oftentimes. and it's just hugely important. Again, it's that bifurcation point. It's either 4 more years of all that horrible stuff that's going to keep happening under Trump, or it's Bernie Sanders, this really beautiful people-powered movement that's going to fight for economic, racial, and environmental justice. And it's could have come at a more pressing time, honestly, because again, you are deluding yourself at this point if you think Joe Biden has any type of chance of defeating Donald Trump. I've made many videos highlighting this point. Policy alone, NAFTA, the 1 million+ jobs that were lost to that, Joe Biden was a big supporter of that. Trump would hammer him on that. He already has been. The Iraq War, Trump would go after him on that as well. Trump is obviously willing to use populist rhetoric when it suits his ends, even though he doesn't necessarily, obviously believe it oftentimes. Got, the bankruptcy bill, wanting to cut Medicare, Social Security, Medicaid, all these benefits multiple times. He would stand no chance. And then obviously the elephant in the room that the Democratic establishment and the elites don't want to talk about is Joe Biden's very obvious cognitive decline. And I'm not trying to say that to poke fun or make fun of him or anything like that. It's just really serious issue at this point, and it's obvious because I don't think he goes through more than one campaign event without having some type of huge gaffe where he just completely forgets what he's trying to say, then he tries to recover, and then it goes, even worse, and he forgets it again, and then just tries to move on. And that's why he's not doing interviews. Rachel Maddow, other reporters have asked to interview him recently. Crickets. Bernie Sanders has been making the circuit. He's going to be on a bunch of Sunday shows, talk shows tomorrow, giving interviews. Joe Biden again had a campaign event today. spoke for a total of 7 minutes, one campaign event. Bernie Sanders had 3 different campaign events today, 2 different states. He was speaking at an average of about an hour each of these events. So again, you need a candidate who's got it all there mentally and physically, because it is a hugely demanding process and then job to campaign and then to govern as president. So, and then we know Joe Biden's not up to it. He gave a 7-minute speech, and there was a part of it he was talking about wanting to re-elect Donald Trump, and he did it twice. And then we have him confusing his wife with his sister during a Super Tuesday event. He recently talked about how he was getting elected to the Senate, and if you don't like him, vote for the other Biden. He's been at a campaign event not too long ago. There's a video going around where I want to say he was in New Hampshire, and he said he was in Vermont, or vice versa, but basically he said he was in the wrong state. I mean, this is why they're only letting him out there at 7 minutes and not doing any interviews and just really having very limited media access and exposure to the public. And I think that's again why the DNC is trying to change the debate format, making it more of a town hall style event, so he's not up there for an hour and a half, 2 hours, and Bernie is just absolutely crushing him on substantive issues, and Joe Biden's going to have no comeback. It's going to be as Kyle Kalinske would do, but with the different sound. So 2 choices. Bernie's the only choice. So again, highly encourage you, if you are a Elizabeth Warren supporter, we are largely fighting for the same issues that Warren was, just maybe sometimes from a more populist or leftist position. And we welcome you with open hearts and open arms. And again, we need to do everything that we can to make sure Bernie's the nominee, because the prospects of another 4 years of Donald Trump for this country and for the world, because of the American empire and all the wars and dictatorships and things like that the U.S. government likes to support. It's hugely important that we get a progressive in the White House. Bernie Sanders is that person. Peace. Much love. Share your comments in the comment sections down here.